The reasons that I've heard from people, who have more experience than us with creating podcasts and all the dynamics that go behind it. The reason they're launching with more than one show is because if the listener hears the episode and likes it, they're going to want to listen to more. And if there is no other episode there, then they may go away. And if they go away, they may never come back.
You are listening to Podcast by Friday with your host, Bill Griggs and Kingsley. This is a show where you are able to create your minimal viable podcast by taking bold action to defeat procrastination and get your voice heard. Welcome to the show and this episode 5 of Podcasts by Friday. And on today's show, you are going to hear Bill and I talk about the truth about the number of shows to start your podcast. There are so many voices out there and so many ideas. Sometimes it's confusing. We are going to clear up that confusion for you in this episode today. So stay tuned for more. Before we get into the number of shows to start your podcast and some reasons surrounding that, we want to talk about a very important aspect of that. So listen in as Bill and I speak about the monetization process, even though you might not be there yet, but you'll find some very interesting insights in this segment.
Until you have monetization, you don't have a business.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
If we're just doing this for the love of podcasting, which, I love podcasting and I love to share the message that, you can do it quick. But I would also like to keep the lights on.
Exactly.
Favor the fan, the air conditioning, whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't have any hesitation whatsoever to monetize this or feel bad about it, because this is true, useful information that, you can act on. You don't have to think about it. We've already done it for you. We're just pointing the way. If you can't do it, it's because you didn't try. Mm-hmm. That's the only reason I can think of it, or you never pressed record.
I agree.
So, is the quality of a podcast that you produce by Friday the same as a podcast that was in production for a week with a team of 15 people? And
I don't think it's going to be.
No, of course not. Mm-hmm. But that's not what we're promising. We're promising that a minimal viable podcast, the minimum podcast that functions and, meets all the criteria that we set. And that, that was, it delivers a message, it gets information, social engagement, and possibly monetizes. The last depends on what their goal is. Not everyone wants to make money off their podcast.
Right. That's true.
I'm not sure who those people are, but I know they're out there. And everybody is constantly, questioning, well, how do I monetize that? How do I make money off my podcast? What's my goal? Yeah. And that's something that we're going to, have to discuss in depth later, but that's not something we need to be concerned with. I mean, if in my way of thinking, if somebody wants to, put some form of monetization in the website during the first week or whatever, they can always just throw Amazon links up, or they can, grab an affiliate program of some kind and put that up. But, that stuff's already done for you.
Right. Don't think you have to know everything we just covered. As a matter of fact, this is a reference portion for you that you can come back to when you need it. It's just in-time learning. Now, listen as we go into the other segment to talk about it doesn't have to be perfect. This is something you are going to hear Bill and I say over and over and over again because, my friend, it is the essence of what we're trying to do here, is to get you started, not get you perfected. So here is now our discussion about that in this segment.
One thing I'm finding that you run across, Kings, is sometimes when you're doing Skype calls is sometimes the bandwidth gets full and, the sound quality goes. Dealing with that can be a real challenge sometimes when you're doing a long episode.
Yeah, that's true because, and I know sometimes if you don't have a direct cable of your internet into your computer, for example, and just have a Wi-Fi connect, sometimes that can also be a problem. And that's why there might be a drag. Or if you're on video and not just on audio, it can be a drag. And the audio, when you look at it, when you listen to the audio, there tend to be, you can hear it. It shows up very loud and clear that there's something here that's gone haywire. And we try, what's wrong? Well, maybe it's just the bandwidth as you describe. And then when that happens, you either have to re-record or try to find a way to explain what happened and let your audience know that this might be what is happening in this show, but don't miss it. Great content is in it.
Yeah. And, if you've got a guest that, you're interviewing, it can be difficult to find time to redo an episode with them. And you can never capture the same stuff twice in a row. So sometimes you have to go with it. So we had some audio issues with this podcast that we're releasing right now. And we could have edited it and fixed these audio issues because we both record. I record on my side and you record on your side. My audio for me, when I'm speaking, is clear on my digital recorder. And yours is clear on yours.
Right.
Yeah. So we could spend the time and splice that all together and give you a beautiful show, but we're going to go ahead, I think. Would you agree with that? We should go ahead? Yeah.
I agree because I think it was great content that's inside the show. And like you said, the first take, most time is so much better than having to do a redo. And so instead of going back and trying to redo the show just to get perfection, and that's where we've been preaching it all along. It's not about perfection. It's about done is better than perfection. And we want to just make sure that as you listen, that it's not that we could not go back and fix this. We could if we wanted to, but then we wanted to teach you or prove a point that these things may happen. And when they do, here are some ways you could go ahead about either letting your audience know what's coming up and let them know the show is not going to be perfect and there's some glitches, there's some problems, whatever it might be. Just tell them. People understand and people are very gracious and are forgiven because of what you are offering them.
Yeah, I just spent some time listening to a really great podcast called Mixergy, and that's by Andrew Warner. It's a gentleman that we both met while we were at the Podcast Movement. It's fantastic. He's just over 1,000 episodes of his show. And he has had this happen to him during the middle of the recording. And he makes no bones about telling people, hey, I record on Skype. And every once in a while, there are issues. And he just keeps rolling. And if he can do that, and he's one of the most downloaded guys out there, so can we.
Yeah, and people are, as I said, are forgiven. People know this is not an everyday occurrence. Things happen, life happens, and when they do, you just move on, you roll with the punches, and just make the best of it, as we're doing here in this episode.
So let's move on.
That's it. Let's move on. What I love about this whole thing is it gives you a chance. You don't have to be perfect. It gives you a chance to do some things. Not that you don't want to put quality things out, obviously, but the point is that you're saying it doesn't have to be like it was created NPR style or NPR team. But I think also it's some practical stuff. What are some things I would need? So if I put myself in that person's shoes, I'm thinking, okay, when I hear podcasts by Friday, I'm hearing quick. I'm hearing, going back to your idea earlier, not today, but earlier, is that I'm hearing minimal, minimal viable product. I'm hearing don't expect perfection. Don't expect the best sound or quality. I'm hearing is let's get this thing up by Friday. Get started, and we can tweak as we go. So that's when I hear that, I'm thinking, okay, I'm game. Sign me up. I come in. Mm-hmm. I believe it now. You get my mind. You've empowered me. You've inspired me. You've motivated me. I agree. I'm nodding. Okay, now my next step. My next step is that you need to, here are some things you need to get going, whether it's hardware or software and software. What are those things? So I'm hearing that. Then second, I'm hearing, okay, all right, I've got the hardware. I got my microphone. It may just be a earbuds from my iPhone. I got that. I got my recorder, whether it's the Pomelo on a PC or the call recorder on a Mac. I've got that. Okay. So I can record my voice. I even have my iPhone. Okay, I can record my voice. Okay, good. So what's my next step? Editing. And just maybe your music. So you want to put some music to the recording. You may want to put some intro to your recording, an outro, whatever it is, your voice, or for now it's very minimal, so it's your voice. And then fine, okay, I need maybe even before that, but the step before that, maybe I need a website, but you don't have to have a website. I mean, fully operational. You can just put it on. Yeah, you don't have to have a website. Period. You can put it on, right?
Yeah, you can. Your web hosting,
right?
Not your web hosting. Excuse me. Your audio hosting service.
Right. It's Spreaker or Libsyn.
Yep, Spreaker, Libsyn, Podbeam, SoundCloud. You name it. There's a ton of them.
So you told me to get that. I get that, and now then I can upload that to one of those audio hosting sites. My podcast is up. Now here are some things you might want to add: is your website, your artwork. Just to kind of because the podcast is up.
Mm-hmm.
So everything else is really now to make it better or to create, is to add the, I have my ice cream. Now I can add all those sprinkles, all those, what do you call those, ingredients?
I disagree.
Okay.
That's what's cool about our partnership. We could disagree.
Oh, of course. I love it.
I actually think that if you launch a podcast without in fact, I'm not even sure you're allowed to, but to launch the show image. In our case, it's the purple background with both of our faces on and a calendar and a microphone on them. Okay, so that's our artwork. When you go to put your podcast onto iTunes, you are asked for that information. And
yes, that's true. That's true.
That's how yours is displayed. I don't know if there's a default blank artwork. There might be. I'll have to look into that. But for instance, with Spreaker, you don't have to put your artwork up the first thing either. Mm-hmm. But you're missing out on SEO points. You're missing out on an identity and a brand.
That's true. That's a good point.
Even if it's just a scribbled image from a piece of paper or whatever, it's better than no image at all.
Okay,
in my opinion. But
no, that's good. I think you're right. I agree. I agree.
Yeah, but so you get that up, and I wouldn't let not having a good image or art stop me from putting up my podcast, though.
Okay,
it's not one of those make or break things. And when we did it, you and I, for this podcast, we had a guy on Fiverr that we sent our idea to, what we wanted it to look like, and he produced a couple of images for us that we didn't like.
Right.
And then you went back and you said, I'm going to do this myself. And you went on Canva and you whipped up our current artwork. and it looks great.
Right.
But if we had just said, "Oh, we can't launch because we didn't like what we got from Fiverr," we'd probably still be waiting.
And I think that's a good. To me, that's what you described just now, Bill. I think it's really. I'm glad you mentioned that because you're right. We would have missed the opportunity for benefiting from that, not only for whether the iTunes or Spreaker would allow. But you said Spreaker might allow you without the image. Yes, I think they will, but iTunes, I don't think iTunes will. But they could start with Spreaker if they just want to have, like, for example, the other podcast that I'm doing, the Success Caribbean Style. I have a website built, but when I first started on Spreaker, it's not on iTunes yet. And so the Podcast by Friday is not on iTunes at this point yet. Because I think the idea behind that, as we discussed, was to have 3 or 4 shows up prior to put it in iTunes. Okay, we get to the place now that maybe this is what you've been waiting for, about the idea of the 3 shows to launch your podcast and why or why not. And is this a myth? Is this something that's really a science to this? Well, you're going to hear Bill and I now get into that aspect of what the show it was centered around, the truth about the number of shows to start your podcast. Now listen very carefully, because it may be answers, or you may hear some things that possibly debunk or go head up or against or agree with. Well, I'll let you be the judge of that. Let's find out what we had to say about how many shows you need to launch your podcast. I know that there's a school of thought that you need to have, it's recommended, but about having more than one show on iTunes. What in your understanding, what's the reason? What's behind that? Is there a science? Do I need to have more than one show?
The reasons that I've heard from people, who have more experience than us with creating podcasts and all the dynamics that go behind it. The reason they're launching with more than one show is because if the listener hears the episode and likes it, they're going to want to listen to more. And if there is no other episode there, then they may go away. And if they go away, they may never come back. So if there's 3 or 4 episodes and they listen to it and then they like it and they listen to another episode and then another, they say, well, you know what? That was pretty good. Maybe I'll just subscribe. And when the next one comes out, I'll listen to that. So that's some of the thinking. The other thinking, I guess, is when Google goes through to rank the podcast, there's more episodes, it shows more activity, more chances. I don't know. I would not, again, I wouldn't not launch my podcast. I would not, I'm going to say this right if it kills me. I would hesitate to launch my podcast because I didn't have 3 or 4 episodes there to put up. I would go ahead and launch. And as soon as you're done launching that, start working on the next one and get that out there in a short period of time. For us, it was a week.
Yeah.
Because that's the schedule we set up. But if it had been, Entrepreneur on Fire, for instance, which I've mentioned him earlier, John Lee Dumas does, he does that every day. So when he recorded his first batch, I think, he's an overachiever. He recorded like 30 episodes so that he had a month's worth ready to go. I am not suggesting anybody else does that.
I was listening to something he said recently that, he's a very disciplined, military background guy, very focused. He said that's one thing of his strength is to be focused. And sometimes people want to be like someone else who they don't understand that if your personality and if your makeup is not that way, then, it's going to not fly because you're not being you. But I think that's a good answer. So it's more than for the benefit of the podcaster to have more than one show because, yes, you want to kind of keep people coming back. and they might be hungry. So I like the explanation. So that would be the reason why we would recommend that they do 3 or 4 shows. And like we're doing, we have 4 shows now on Spreaker, and now looking forward to putting that show on iTunes.
Yeah, probably by the time that people are listening to this episode, Podcast by Friday will be out on iTunes. So it's just a matter of...
So how does that happen? I mean, because I know sometimes, for me, I'm kind of new to Spreaker. I know you're more an expert there than I am to some degree. I wonder, what's the ease? Is it easy to put that? How do you direct your show from Spreaker to iTunes?
Well, in Spreaker, there is a section for RSS feed customization. And you go in there and you enter the information that you want to have for your podcast. For instance, the title of the podcast and the subtitles, that you would use in iTunes, whatever. The language that the podcast is in, the culture, etc. Once you get all of that in, you put in your artwork, your website listing, your copyrights, and a bunch of other things. And then it's ready for submission to iTunes. And you would save that. It generates the information, and you can then take that information over to iTunes and enter it there and hit submit. And once you've done that, in 1 or 2 days, 3 days, your episode will begin showing up on iTunes.
Okay.
I plan to give a much more detailed step-by-step explanation of that in screen captures that I'm doing right now as we're getting ready to put Podcast by Friday onto iTunes. So, everybody will be able to watch and see everything that went into that.
It's a great idea. It's great to capture that, because sometimes, we can explain that and the person nod their head, but seeing it becomes a lot more helpful. So I think it's a great idea to capture it visually. I mean, screen by screen, and walk the person through the process.
And we can create a PDF, or whatever that has the things that you need to gather together before you get to that phase. So that you're ready to go.
It's a good idea.
Yeah.
I love that.
You were about to say?
No, I think that's really a good thing. So once they are on iTunes, so now they're on Spreaker, now they're on iTunes, and I think that, so at least that's getting the podcast up, and that's what the goal was, to get the podcast up. And then there are the other things we described earlier that they can now put more, take some energy and put towards that, because I think, again, as I mentioned, without repeating myself here or sounding too repetitive, is getting that episode, that podcast up by Friday. Is really the goal behind all that we're trying to do here. And if they were able to accomplish that by what we just described, then at least that person would be satisfied, because that's a promise we're making to them. They can have it up by Friday if they just follow these procedures, these things we've identified and outlined for them. The other things we have described and touched on earlier, we can now begin to focus on, because they can say, hey, my podcast is up, and they can now, of course, have people listening. And then it's almost like, refining things as you go. When
it's exactly like that.
Right? Yeah, it is. I mean, I remember when I first got my iPhone sometime back, and all the different fixes that were sent and all the different updates that were coming in so rapidly, because it wasn't perfect, but then they make those fixes as time goes by. At least it was functionable.
That's a great example. The iTunes and our computers, everything, they don't even hesitate to release something that is not perfect. They say, we'll just patch it once it's up there.
And that's what I think we're after, really.
Mm-hmm. I remember seeing a clip where some guy was in a recording studio with a bunch of musicians, and they're getting set up to play, and the guitar player pulls out the guitar and he starts tuning it, and the guy who's recording everything, the engineer, says, never mind about tuning them, boys. We'll fix it in the mix. And that's kind of what we're doing here.
Yeah.
Let's just get it on tape and get it out. And, we can fix it as we go.
That's great. I like that. That's so true, And I think these are some great tips that we realize if that person who is now listening can say, hey, I feel better. I feel as if I could do this. I feel like it's manageable. It's not perfection, because done is always better than perfect. And now they can say, hey, at least I feel like I'm a podcaster, so I'm empowered. I am a podcaster. Come on, baby. Shout from the mountaintop,
I love it. It's funny. We've been giving them the 10,000 foot view right now, of this whole thing. But, now we're going to zoom down into ground level and show them exactly what we got to do to make things happen. And that's, I think, what people really need and what they're waiting for. We're just two guys who have done this before. I mean, we both have multiple podcasts now, and we've launched them fairly quickly, and we've done this. We got this.
Yes.
So now it's just up to us to show people how to do what we did, and that's the basics of what I like to do: sharing the information that I've gathered. So make it easier for other people.
Yes.
And if they're happy with what we teach them, they may reward us in some way.
Of course. And not if they are happy, because I believe that what happier feeling to know that what I once thought to be this, insurmountable, what I once thought to be this mountain, to get over this mountaintop of getting this podcast, which really is a big thing. Once that is done, who would not be happy with that? Because all these weeks and months, the stress, the frustration, the questioning, the doubts, the fears. So now they can go and exhale and have a drink or whatever they want to do, right? Because they can say, my podcast is finally there.
Yeah. And, something you just said a moment ago kind of got me thinking about this, but if you wanted to climb Mount Everest, you'd have to do it one step at a time. You start at the bottom, work your way up to the top. That's just the way you climb a mountain, and that is the way you do a podcast. You've got to do it one step at a time. And, you could rent a helicopter and get you right to the top of Mount Everest, I suspect. But that wasn't the point of Mount Everest. The point was to, take that journey. Yeah. And our podcast by Friday technique's actually kind of like a helicopter for the podcast, but we're still taking it in small steps.
Yes.
Flying right up to the summit, but we're getting there fast.
And that's why I think that person will be happy, because they feel like, okay, I'm getting somewhere finally getting somewhere.
That's wonderful, Kingsley.
Oh, wow. I'm handing you some tissue, my friend. Here's some tissue right here. So again, just reach across the earbuds of that person listening right now, and then hand them that tissue as well, and say, hey, you can cry on us for this, and
yeah. I'll tell you.
Pay us later.
All joking aside, the feeling when I got that first episode out there and
true,
play it back, I can't describe how immense the joy was at that, the feeling of accomplishment.
Yeah.
From there.
The feelings of accomplishment. Let that kind of sink in. Take some time to think, feel, taste that moment. Imagine when you have launched your first episode. what will that feel like? Put yourself there. Kind of fast forward if you can. I know you might be driving or walking or running or at the gym listening to this, and you probably may not be able to do that right now, but would you sometime today sit down for a few seconds and just imagine when that first episode is launched. Feel that, the excitement, the rush of the adrenaline. You wanted to let everybody know that you've launched your first episode of your podcast. Feel that right now. See that happening. Almost taste it. That is what we are wanting you to experience. And Bill is just beginning to introduce what it was like for him. If you can do that, that will be huge. So let us take some time, or let me encourage you to take some time to do that before we conclude our episode today. If you have to go back and revisit this part, then please do so. Okay, so let's kind of get more into what that was like as we come towards the ending of our episode in the show.
When I got that first episode out there and
true.
Play it back, I can't describe how immense the joy was at that, the feeling of accomplishment from that. And I just want to share that feeling with others. That's all. It is just, it transcends. Oh, I don't need to go there, but I mean, it just is so amazing a feeling that everybody should have that.
It's just hard to describe until you've experienced it. I think, like you said just now, when you experience it, and that's why I think this person, the listener, is going to be happy because they've experienced what they've seen so many do, and wish one day that would be them. They long for that day. So you've given them reason now to exhale, reason to say, "I've done it. I did it." It's almost like the Olympics that's going on right now, and you watch those competitors. And when they finish their competition and they win, it's almost like, oh man, all these years I worked so hard, and finally, that's the feeling I believe for that person who have been so longing to have a podcast. I think it's similar to what you described just now when you first had yours up. It's one of those moments, and I think that's what you said. And yeah, I too want that person. I want you to, as a listener, to have that feeling, and that's what we want for you. And so I think for, as Bill and mine's heart is that you experience that, because why not you? You've waited long enough. It's your turn. Mm-hmm. Let's make it happen.
You mentioned the Olympics. I just watched Michael Phelps and the U.S. team win the 4x100 meter event and receive their gold medal. And one of Michael's teammates was so overwhelmed with the feeling of accomplishment of that goal that he's probably had since he was a little kid and first able to get into the pool. And, he broke down in tears. Mm. And there's this moment when Michael Phelps, who's the older, more experienced swimmer with 20 plus gold medals to his, sees this, and you can't hear exactly what he says, but he says, "Hey man, it's cool." And then he reaches over and pats him on the shoulder, and he brings him in for a hug. And then yeah, I get it. I'm with you there. I'm feeling that feeling. And it was just totally amazing to watch and very rewarding. USA. Anyway,
so are you saying, Bill, we're like Michael Phelps, we're reaching through the earbuds of that person and we're pulling them in and say, "Hey, it's okay. We understand."
Yeah, I guess I am.
That's cool.
I don't know, that's cool. 20 gold medals, but we got a few.
That's cool. No, I love that analogy. I think that was well said, and probably a great place to kind of wrap up this episode.
Yeah. If our listeners want to contact us, how do they do that, Kingsley?
Great question. Podcast at Podcast by Friday. How much easier is that to remember? Just email us at podcast at Podcast by Friday, and we'll get back to you as quickly as possible. And they also can go to the website and see what other things that I mean, actually just check out where we're at and see what's possible and how eventually our site's going to be changed over time because it's not perfect yet. And it's never going to be perfect, but it's not perfect. But it's really a reflection of what we're describing here as well. We're doing the very same thing.
Yeah, we just got the website up and running. And I'm very happy with the start that we've made with this at podcastbyfriday.com. So I encourage you to go and check that site out. And pretty soon we'll have information about exactly how we created that site. In fact, I've got videos of the process.
That's cool.
Yeah. So don't be afraid to take the first step on something like this. I mean, it's a big task, but if you do it one step at a time, you can do it. And
with the Michael Phelps guidance of Bill Griggs and Kingsley Grant, we are going to help you celebrate and stand on that stage with your goal simply because you've launched your podcast.